welcome. Hello, how are you? It's episode 122 of Grow Yourself Up, and I'm delighted to be here with you. And today I want to talk to you about our inner child and parenting. So, how our own younger selves get triggered in parenting, in mothering, in parenting, and how to kind of tend to that and be with that. So, one of the things that can feel particularly hard in parenting is when we are shifting cycles, or we consider ourselves to be a cycle breaker or a cycle starter or a cycle beginner, however you want to language it. And when our children attack or shout at us or criticize us, it can feel very devastating and very impactful for our inner child, particularly if we ourselves are in a phase of feeling a lot of shame or insecurity, so are ourselves existing a lot in a younger place. Then having our child criticize us can feel really devastating if we take it to heart. And I'm going to read something that's been sent to me from one of the listeners to kind of segue into this conversation. So this mum says, I've recently been having a funny emotional experience with my 2.5-year-old, or she'll be 3 now actually, around feedback, and I'm hoping you can help shed any light on how to respond in these moments. Lately, my daughter has these swings from giving heavy compliments to giving severe critiques, if you can really call that from a 3-year-old. Here's an example. The other day, she spontaneously told me, "You're a good mama," while we were on a walk. Then the next morning, she woke up by softly stroking my cheeks and saying, "Mama, you're so beautiful." Although I never expect this kind of validation from my daughter, I was surprised how much it meant to my heart to hear these words from her. But the next day, in a difficult moment of teeth brushing, she told me with equal conviction, "You're not a good friend. You're not a very good mama. You're not beautiful, and I don't like your face." Oof, you can really feel that, can't you? At first, I was able to brush it off as silly behavior, but as she kept furthering the comments, some very small part of me felt crushed. Not so much by the passing critique, but because I realized her compliments couldn't have had any more weight than her negative comments. I understand kids are like little scientists at this age, testing out emotional responses to understand what makes people react. I feel ridiculous for feeling this way, but my inner ego can't seem to let it go, and I wonder if I can't or shouldn't put weight into anything she says. I'd like to know how to respond in these moments. So there's so much in that message. And first of all, I really want to honor and validate how devastating it can feel. This particular mom sort of shames herself for her own responses. And I want to acknowledge that there is a lot of hurt if that happens, particularly when we ourselves are feeling vulnerable and we are not in our adult state. So please don't, if you identify with that and you also feel bruised or hurt by your children's responses, please notice that and allow that. You're a person. You're not a rock. You're not a rock with no feelings. You're a loving person, and it's impactful when someone is hurtful. And secondly, there's a lot of truth in that thing that children are testing out things and they're practicing. They're learning how to be in the world. So let me give you a little kind of analogy. When we haven't had our emotions tended to, and we haven't learned kind of the full spectrum of our emotional life is kind of flat, like a flat sheet. Now, I'm sure you've all seen those, like either a pop-up birthday card or something that opens up and there's like a real 3D display in a card, or like sometimes in books, in pop-up books, children's books, you get the page is flat and then it opens up and there's this big kind of thing that opens up. Your emotional life, you may be growing your own emotional life alongside your children and starting to understand the nature of it and the different colors and the different textures and the depth of the colors in some place and the intensity. And that is also happening for your child. And so when you yourself are not, because we're in this growing up process of being able to tolerate things, when you yourself are not that used to your own emotional landscape, of course there will be a lot of hurt. And also when we're not kind of sure about what our role is as a mother, or we react to our children as if they're another adult, that also adds a bit of confusion. So I want to give you some kind of broad pointers around kind of conceptualizing this sort of stuff, because my firm view is that when you are holding yourself in high regard, when you are learning to better meet your needs, when you are feeling more regulated, you won't need scripts around how to deal with this. You'll be able to intuitively respond from your own wisdom to your children, and you'll be able to understand if it's appropriate to say, oh, that felt really hurtful. Like, for example, if your teenage daughter or your 19-year-old or your 15-year-old says something really unkind to you, like very bitchy or really mean or critical, then at that age, it may be appropriate to reflect back that that felt really hurtful and that's kind of not very relational to be like that. Perhaps not in the moment of an angry fight, but to allow that feedback because that person is older. But a 2.5-year-old and a 3-year-old, I don't think that that's going to be, that will not be helpful in the context of the relationship because of the way they are using us as a practice. It's like a sort of a practice board, and I'll get more into that. Let me just start off by giving you some pointers. So first of all, I think it's really important that we do not use children's behavior as a guide to assess our parenting. I'm not sure it's overly helpful to assess our parenting on a continuous basis anyway. Rather, looking at the quality of the relationship and what is going on in the relationship and how you feel in the relationship is more useful. But, for example, if your child is criticizing you or having a lot of angry feelings, that's not necessarily about kind of what's going on. So when children are upset, they do want to criticize because they're lashing out, they're practicing their fight response. And that is okay. That doesn't mean anything about your parenting. If children are continuously aggressive and kind of getting into ages 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, there are probably a lot of other things also going on rather than just something going on in your parenting. So please don't look at your children's behavior and make sweeping statements about yourself as a parent. That's the first thing. Behavior is much, much more complex than parenting, and there is not, it's not in your favor to constantly criticize or shame yourself if your child is having a lot of issues. I'll give you an example. In our household, well, I'm going to talk generally about this. Aggression and very big reactivity is often about a retained reflex. It's often about some underlying neurodivergence. It may be about brain inflammation. It may be about toxicity in the system. It may be about biochemistry. It may be about the child having PANS or PANDAS, so having a strep infection in their brain. There are a lot of other things that drive continuous aggression. I will address that as well in a separate episode. But I don't want you to take, if you notice your child's being very aggressive, do not then just go into self-blame. That's not helpful. So first thing, your child's behavior is not the guide that to use to assess yourself. Secondly, I'm borrowing here from the work of Tara Moore, who actually talks much more about women and how we turn up in our careers and our lives. But she talks about the importance of unhooking from both praise and criticism. And I think that's a really, really important thing that we can apply to parenting. Unhook from your children's feedback. Unhook from their praise and their criticism. You are growing yourself up so you can lead and guide in your family and determine the values about how you want to live and use those as a guide to how you want to parent and how you want to kind of turn up in the world. And so your child's mood, if they've got low blood sugar or they've just had too many chocolates or something, they might lose it. Those things, and then they may watch a TV program where something happens or there's some praise or, you may always tell them how wonderful they are and they may mirror that back to you. But that doesn't mean that you need to be assessing yourself based on what they're saying. So unhook from praise and criticism. Then I want to give you this idea of the mother or the primary caregiver being a container for feelings And we are when our child is learning about their own emotional landscape. So remember, you may have grown up having a completely flat emotional landscape, and now you're developing this whole beautiful 3D kind of pop-up thing, which is growing all the time with different depths and hues and colors and intensity. And your child is practicing on you to create this kind of landscape. And you may also be practicing on them, frankly. But in the context of the dyad of parent-child, we are initially an object. So your child, your 2.5-year-old, your 3-year-old, your 4-year-old, doesn't see you as a full separate person because they are still learning about themselves and their own emotional landscape and their relationship to other people. So what happens is that they practice their feelings on you. They have their feelings. You mirror back what is going on in their own in their internal world by, if they're having a bit of tricky time with their Lego or something, and you're like, "Oh, you're having such a tricky time. It's so hard to build that. I can see you getting really frustrated, and you felt super angry when your sister stamped on that. Let me help you build that, and we are not going to go and hit our sister." So they learn, oh yeah, that feeling of that column of intensity in my chest as it comes up, that's something about my frustration and my rage. And it's okay to feel frustration and rage, but I'm going to learn that I cannot go and kind of club my sister when that happens. But that's all from you mirroring them. So you are there performing a function for them in terms of helping them color in their own emotional life. So I hope this makes sense. They are not, as a little 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 6-year-old, thinking, oh, this might be hard for mommy. This might be really like fucking exhausting for her, frankly. They are just in the heat of the moment, being driven by their body. And you come in with your frontal cortex and your hopefully more flexible, regulated nervous system to notice what's going on, to name it, to make it palatable to them, to feed them back a story. And that mirroring is essential. But they are not doing that for you. So let's be really clear about that. It's not their role to do that for you. So you are being the container and the mirror, and you are performing as the subject in this kind of movie is your child. And I'm going to talk more about this kind of subject and object relations in the next episode, actually, or the episode in two weeks' time. So you are remember that they are not relating to you as another adult. And that can be really helpful in unhooking from praise and criticism, because you are like this kind of practice. It's like we're like the tennis, when you play tennis and you hit a ball against a wall, hitting it back. We are like that wall in a way, and they hit the stuff against us. And yes, it's exhausting and draining and battering, frankly, emotionally battering sometimes. And we are mirroring stuff back to them and helping them build that emotional landscape. We're helping them connect the sensations in their body to the events that happen outside of them, to language their emotions, and to help them then learn how to process it so they can complete a cycle, like a feeling cycle in the moment. So, going back to that Lego example, if they're trying to build something but they're feeling quite frustrated, they don't quite yet have the skill, so they might need to get you to help, and then they might feel really frustrated if something stamps on them. So you can really language, it was so difficult to build that. We did it together, then someone stamped it and you felt really angry. And now we're going to express that anger. So I sometimes stamp with my kids, we move our arms together, we say we're angry, but we don't go over and beat our sibling, or not beat me either, frankly. Or we kind of push against a wall, because your fight response is often in your arms, so you can discharge that energy in your arms. But that all happens over many, 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 many iterations. And if you had none of that done for you, you are learning as you go along. You really are learning. You still may have huge explosions when they behave like that, because it feels so shocking to your nervous system, and because your emotional landscape is not developed. So I really want you to just don't take your child's behavior as kind of an indicator of how you're doing. yes, it's important to process your own stuff. And sometimes our children's behavior can show where we are not owning stuff in our subconscious. Yes, that is definitely true. But overall, you don't need to kind of be constantly assessing their behavior and thinking if they're not being good or nice in inverted commas that there's something wrong. Secondly, unhook from praise or criticism. And thirdly, really understand your role, that you are a container, you're mirroring back to them, and they do not see you. They don't have the ability to mentalize and to think, to ponder about your experience. Only you have that. You are the adult. There's sometimes I see on social media or I hear people saying, oh, you're hurting mummy's feelings. When you do that, you're hurting mummy's feelings. That's very unhelpful. I want to be very clear about that, because the child doesn't have, they are still learning to mentalize. Mentalizing is when you, it's a, can't remember who's from, I've talked about this in another episode. It's someone, Fanagi, someone, from Peter Fanagi, I think. I'll put that in the show notes, but it's not, that's, mentalization is not my concept. And that is the ability that we have as adults. You know, if you go into a meeting with adults, you can understand that other people in that meeting are having a different emotional experience to you. They have a different lens and they are understanding things differently. And you can conceptualize of that and wonder what their emotional experience is in order to meet them. And we do that in a relationship all the time. But children do not have that ability. So it's not helpful to say you're hurting mummy's feelings when you're a 2 or 3-year-old, because they don't know what that means. And then they think that they're responsible for your feelings, and they're not responsible for your feelings. So yeah, so really hold on to that you are the adult and you are a container and you're mirroring. And this takes a lot of practice and a lot of your own personal growth, because you have to grow your adult within you. So this is why we call, this is Grow Yourself Up. We have to grow that kind of capacity in us to do this. It's really hurtful when, if you're assessing your parenting on how what your children are feeling back to you, this is really devastating. It's the same sort of thing as if you're being a people pleaser and you are wanting them to be in a good mood. That again, we have to detach from that, because that we don't need to use their moods as a guide to our parenting, or that we need to change something. But this requires that we learn about boundaries. It requires that we understand of what our role is, that we can accurately conceptualize of this. And if we haven't had this done for us, there's a lot of learning that we need to do around this. Okay, so I want you to kind of really understand that this is going to be an iterative process that you go through. You don't get this right first time, and you have to go through it many, many times. And you don't need to beat yourself up for this. Like if you had a completely flat emotional landscape and you've never had your feelings held for you, this is going to be like a big shock. Let's be very honest about that. The fourth thing I want to talk about is really about when we're considering our inner child and our mothering, is we are all different people, and our own authenticity is really valid and needs to be celebrated. You don't have to be like your friend. You don't have to be like your sister. I'm not in any way suggesting you be like me. I'm suggesting you understand yourself and you begin to really celebrate your own authenticity and allow for that. You are what your children need. They love you to bits. They think you're the best thing ever. And you can only be you, and you are great. Part of the work is actually starting to understand you are good enough, you are great, and allowing that. So, let me give you an example in my household. So my children practice all the time in terms of their language and how they express their anger, and it's a messy business. It's not neat. It doesn't always look nice. I object strongly to nice anyway, but it doesn't. It's messy, and they may say things that you think are unkind or kind of unpalatable, but we don't learn to be personable and relational and loving and kind people in the world by banishing our own shadow side. So in my twins' relationship, Both of them are quite vocal a lot of the time. They both have told me they would like a baby brother, and they don't want their sister. We won't be having a baby brother. That ship has sailed. We're not having any more children. But one of them has said when she's been really cross with her sister. So they have both expressed they want their sister to go away. One of them has more kind of colourful ways of expressing herself, which I frankly find hilarious sometimes. She said she wanted to break up with her sister. She said she wanted her to move out. She said she's going to make her eat broccoli for 200 years, which I thought was hilarious. They have both expressed that they wish they could be just like the single sister. Could I be the, not have to share me? And I've really validated, and one of them actually has said she's sometimes, let me just finish the bit and then I'll tell you this other bit. I really try and hold space for and validate that. There are certain things that I won't have. So they have also both said sometimes they hate each other. And I will language that, I will speak that back to them. Oh, you're feeling like you really hate her. And that feels really hard. And I don't mind the use of the word hate because I really consider that to be the opposite side of love, and that they exist kind of in a, they exist in us. What I object to, but when I'm with them, I won't let them be rude and unkind to each other. I'll just stay with their own emotional experience and tell them how hard it feels, and then name what's underneath. That there's frustration, there's sadness, and there's anger. So the sadness is kind of what's really underneath it. The sadness that they can't have me all to themselves, and that there's a frustration that they have to take turns on something. And that feels really annoying. They don't want to take turns. They want to have me help them do whatever they're doing right now all together. But that's not the reality. But it takes time to learn that. Many adults are really crap turn takers as well. We don't like to wait. So we have to really be realistic about what we can expect from children, because in society, we often expect way too much from children. Like we expect more than we expect from adults. That's very unrealistic. So I'm happy with that expression about, when they've talked about wanting to move out, all of that sort of thing. And I'll let them have that and then try and facilitate a collaboration and a coming back together. But often just the expression of the feeling and not the demonizing of it makes it dissipate. And then they naturally come back together. And they've learned that there's relational safety in expressing that when I am holding and reflecting and mirroring. And I don't let them take it out on each other. So I'm not sitting like we have a boxing match or something where they say this to each other. I am there helping them process and collaborating and explaining what's going on for both of them. Where I won't let them say things is so one of my daughters at a place that she was at, someone said, "I'm going to kill you." And she has said that to me, and I have said, "No, that's not okay. Do you know what that means, first of all?" So she didn't know that means I would not be here anymore if that happened. And I said that would be like really sad, and that language does not work. Yeah, we're not going to talk like that to each other. So in your authenticity, you have to decide what you can tolerate. You have to decide in your own family what you can tolerate. You'll have your own boundaries and your own sensibilities around what language you will feels acceptable in your family, and where your boundaries are around what is okay. So, ponder that. Talk about that if you have a partner. Talk about that with your partner. For me, the killing was just way too, there's so much violence inherent in that, and we're not going to speak to each other like that. Absolutely not. And also, by the way, do you know what that means? And she didn't know what that meant. And then she confirmed indeed she didn't want that to happen, and she hasn't ever said that since. Also, going back to the authenticity within the context of relationships. So I am much more impulsive with my language than my husband, and I swear. He doesn't really swear that much. I swear much more. And I also, sometimes when I'm driving in the car, say words like idiot. And my one daughter has called me a fucking idiot before, and she has also called her sister a fucking idiot. And she got fucking from me for sure. I mean, the word. And I've kind of had to really acknowledge that's definitely come from me, and to really teach her that that's not a word It's not a word that's going to be helpful to use at this age. It's not kind of appropriate. I've told her that it's an adult word and it's an expression for when you're kind of feeling angry and frustrated, but that it's not a suitable word for her to use now. And sometimes when she gets really cross, she does use it. But for me, I don't take a particularly hard line around that, because I also say that word sometimes. And so, I don't know, this might make you aghast about this, but I feel like we have to really acknowledge, like, ourselves. What are we putting out there? And I can't, if I sometimes say fucking when I'm really angry, then I can't really control her not to do that, except I can guide her that it's not useful at her age. It's not appropriate out in the world. And generally it's not appropriate in language. It might be coming up when you're angry. So I really say that, because I don't go out in the world and say that all the time. It's only when I'm having a frustrating moment at home, or I've dropped something, or I've broken something. But I try not to criticize myself for this and to kind of beat up on myself and think, oh, I've taught her terrible language. I can still guide her around that it's not really a suitable word for her to use at this age. Okay. And again, my husband, he really doesn't like any of that sort of language. So he doesn't use any of that language. And he does encourage me not to. And he tells the girls not to. So we all have slightly different styles around that. And notice what your styles are. Because we're not aiming for some sort of cookie cutter version of ourselves. We're aiming for authenticity and a safe emotional place for our kids. So how can you celebrate and own your own authenticity? How can you figure out what feels important in your own house? What are your bottom lines? What does feel that we cannot cross that line. It's really important that we hold that line. Just discover that for yourself. And know that in the practicing of anger, words like this will come out, because if you are having rage or if you are swearing, they've heard that. And so it might come out if they are having rage or feeling anger. And we kind of can't expect more from our children than we expect from ourselves. We can't put them to a higher standard of behavior than we ourselves are holding up. So really be honest about that with yourself. Notice what's going on in your own family. I have taken a kind of a wide view of this, you're practicing your fight response. You're noticing what happens. I am noticing what happens when you're stressed, and I am going to help you with how to manage this. So I am all the time trying to help them with, when we go into fight, what is actually constructive. It's not constructive to call either me or your sister a fucking idiot. What is more constructive? And how can we kind of go into what's more constructive? Because letting your child stand up for themselves with you is really important. We don't get to be empowered adults if we have been crushed at home. If we have, many of you probably have been crushed at home. Many of us have been crushed at home because we were emotionally neglected. We got no kind of view of our emotional landscape, and anger has been demonized, particularly for women. So your expression of your anger may come out as rage purely because it was completely squashed in childhood. And so you didn't learn any healthy approaches to anger. You didn't learn it was okay. You didn't learn it was okay to channel your anger. You didn't learn that your anger is in fact a gateway. It's like a gateway to what you need. And so, really hold this kind of yourself, because if you are learning in motherhood, wow, my anger is a gateway. It's showing me, it's guiding me to what I need to tend to. And at the same time, you're dealing with a 2-year-old or 3-year-old or 4-year-old or 5-year-old who's having big rage attacks or meltdowns. That's just such a lot for you. So really kind of hold this all with compassion and with kindness and with a really wide angle lens. Hold it lightly as you figure out how you want to be in your family, what feels really important for you around bottom lines, and about how you can respond in times when your children are angry, and how can you help them with what's going on for them. And one of the biggest parts of this is tending to our own inner child and reassuring ourselves that we're good enough parents and that we're learning. Because going back to the message from the listener about how she talked about it as her ego, but using the word ego often has negative connotations. When we are in our inner child and that someone criticizes us or says we're terrible or we've got an awful face, or that feels so mean. It feels like really devastating. So our job there is to be with ourselves and to just acknowledge, oh, sweetheart, that feels so hard. That feels really devastating to hear. And for us to soothe that part of ourselves, so to connect to that with self-touch, looking yourself in the mirror can be very loving, acknowledging that pain, like actually acknowledging how jarring that is and how it kind of comes into you and like rams your nervous system. And, that's what I did a post on Instagram about how mothering can feel so battering. And there's so much, because of this role that we're occupying, this really big emotional role, which I'm going to talk a lot more about. We have to really kind of steel ourselves to that, but it's not about steeling ourselves to brace ourselves and make us really kind of tense or contracted in this. It's to kind of grow this capacity to hold this and to be soft with this and to let it wash over us. That when we haven't ourselves had this done for us, we just do not have that. So you're growing capacity as you go. And part of that is really softening into your pain. So acknowledging that pain. If your child like criticizes you or says you're rubbish or you're the worst, one of my daughters says, oh, you're the worst mum in the world. And I'm like, oh, you're just feeling such a tricky time. You're really feeling like I'm the worst mum in the world. You're feeling so frustrated. That feels really hard. And yet she still wants to hug. She wants to kind of say you're the worst mum in the world, but she needs comfort. And that's the kind of real conundrum of motherhood. It's the conundrum, it's the paradox, it's the fucking battering. There's so much that you're holding and doing. And we have to really grow ourselves up into that role and acknowledge all of the complexity there and not make it about our children. It's not about your children being bad and it's not about you being bad. It's about the complexity inherent in the role, the fact that you may be taking on too much of what they say is truth, and that you are constantly hypervigilant and scanning for anything to shame yourself with. So I really want to suggest you stop doing that. Stop using their behavior as that guideline to assess whether you're good or bad. Stop doing that assessment of good or bad altogether. Know that you're trying, you're learning, you're doing your best, you're good enough. Unhook from the praise and the criticism and focus instead on regulating yourself and being present for what's there and knowing that this role is very emotionally and psychologically complex. It's triggering all your own attachment stuff. Your sensory system is always being triggered. Your nervous system is always being triggered. And the kind of that analogy I gave you when we're like the tennis wall, I'm going to spend a whole episode talking about that so that you can understand more about from like a psychological development point of view, the role that you're already occupying, and use that to kind of just know that it's okay. To kind of bring some distance to this pain, because we want to soothe the inner child and we want to say, sweetie, it's okay. This is a role you're playing. You're helping them with their emotional development. If she says, I'm the worst mum in the world, that doesn't mean anything. It just means she's probably really frustrated that I've said she can't have that chocolate biscuit. And she's practicing her outrage on me. And this is really why motherhood is so complex emotionally, because that emotional life, if we haven't been given access to our emotional world and to our internal world and to knowing ourselves like this, it's very battering experiencing our children kind of in this sort of way. So really be very gentle with yourself. Spend time soothing your inner child. Know that you're good enough. And I'd love to know any feedback or thoughts you have on this. And I'd love to know, what are your bottom lines? What do you think about swearing? Do you also sometimes get called the F word or something, an effing idiot? Don't get me wrong, I don't encourage this, and I don't kind of I find it funny sometimes when I'm not with them, but you know, this is a messy business. And we really want to be sort of widening our window of tolerance to be in the mess. Okay, I'm sending you lots of love and I'm wishing you a great week.